From the Ticats Audio Network, this is Tiger Cats Game Day with Courtney Stephen and Mike Daly.
Welcome to Tiger Cats Game Day on the Ticats Audio Network. My name is Courtney Stephen. His name is Mike Daly, and it is game day. But for the first time, unfortunately, your Hamilton Tiger Cats are not suiting up. They are not getting ready to play a game because last week they traveled out to Montreal and they fell to the Montreal Alouettes in the East semifinal 28-17. It was a long season. It was a tough season. Character was built, as they say. There were ups, there were downs, there was tears of joy. Great performances and some things left to be desired. Mike, it was a lot of things. But when you look back on the 2022 season, how would you describe it? And how would you describe that playoff run that came up just a little bit shy, ended in Montreal?
Yeah, the season is no surprise how anybody would describe it. You know, a lot of lows at the beginning, kind of that fight at the end of the season, and to be able to get that streak going and then get into the playoffs, which is, you know, number one goal is you got to get in the playoffs to be able to win the Grey Cup. So they did that, got that goal. But, I mean, really, when you start to look at it in that Montreal game, kind of those demons ended up popping back up, right? Couple turnovers, lost that turnover battle. And then really, you know, with anybody looking at this game, really lost all three phases, right? And it's really hard to win a football game when you don't win on offense, defense, or special teams. And it was just kind of one of those things where, you know, it was a tough ending, but it's, you know, it was nice to see the fight that the Ticats had, especially at that end run of the season, to get themselves into the playoffs and have that kind of chance.
Fight they did. They threw everything they had at the Montreal Alouettes. Dane Evans was in the game. Matt Schultz was in the game. Wes Hills, Sean Thomas Erlington, Tim White, he had what was a valiant effort with 12 attempts, 8 receptions, 142 yards receiving. Stephen Dunbar Jr., 3 receptions, 52 yards and a touchdown. There was guys who were given everything they could to that game, but in the end it just wasn't enough. And I found that Montreal, over the course of many years, just being division rivals in a sense, regardless of how the year is going, Montreal and Hamilton, they tend to match up very competitively, and it doesn't matter who is the quarterback, who is on defense. These two teams, they really play it close and they play tough games. A lot of big defensive plays from Montreal on this one. And as they head into Toronto to play the East Final against the Toronto Argonauts, I'm sure that they'll be leaning on that defense to make some more plays as they aim to get back to their first Grey Cup in about 10 years. But before we talk about Montreal and what they're trying to accomplish, Mike, we missed you for a couple episodes, man. You took a hiatus. You put on the 4-5 and went back like Jordan. The game pulled you back in, man. Tell us a little bit about your experience going back into that black and gold, putting the pads on, and just dusting off the cleats and getting back active on the player side of things.
Yeah, it was cool, man. It was nice to get back in there. Got the call from Drew Alamang to pretty much say, hey, you want to suit up for the playoff run? Really as an insurance backup. I ended up talking to a bunch of people, figuring out if it was going to work all right. And you were the first person I text saying, Court, am I absolutely insane to go do this? and I think you said, hey, playing football is better than any other job. And I was like, done deal. So
you know it.
So you talked me into it. But no, it was cool, man. It was, as you know, you're around the locker room a lot, to get back into there and see some of the friends that you just talk to on text, now to see them in person all the time. It was cool. It was cool to get back in there and be a part of something like that. It's just, too bad it fell short and a little bit early, but nice to be back out there and running around a little bit.
Speaking of running around, I know you're in shape lifting weights, but were you in shape to be running around and running on a football field?
I'll tell you, I hadn't put cleats on in the longest time. Probably all season I hadn't put cleats on, but I was playing some basketball, and so, I mean, basketball is harder than football, really, just cardio-wise. So I was all right that way, but I went out to individual drills, and I was, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'll go to the back of the line here, put my cleats on, make sure I don't fall, and then right when I was going up, I was like, okay, don't fall. Made it through that first Indy drill day, and I was like, well, I feel pretty good. This is nice. This is going to work out. And Coach O kept coming up to me and saying, hey, are your legs working? Are your legs working? I'm like, yeah, I think so. I think they are.
Hey, just put the left in front of the right and
Right.
repeat. That's how you do it, man. Awesome. Well, 2022, it was a colorful year. There was a lot of things that happened, a lot of storylines, ups and downs, unexpected things. But which players surprised you this year, if any? Were there some guys that stood out in any way, for the positive, for the negative, for a curveball? Did they show you different things that you didn't expect? Who were some guys that stood out to you this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that come to mind almost immediately, right? Like a guy like Tim White, who really, took hold of that offense and was kind of that shining star no matter who was throwing him the ball, right? No matter what that offense looked like, Tim seemed to be making plays all over the field. Another guy that I really liked was Sean Thomas Erlington, right? And we had talked about this for a little bit, but for the opportunities, which were few and far between, for the opportunities that he had, he really capitalized on them, right? And he was that good little, Swiss Army knife that the offense could lean on. But those are two guys I think that popped to my mind on the offensive side of the ball. But I'm curious to see, who you were thinking of as well.
Well, I think this guy, it really impressed me because it's almost as if he started the season in mid-season form, and he just closed out the year with a really strong performance in Montreal, and I thought it was just indicative of how he's grown in his career and where he's at. But that's number 2, Tunde Adeleke. I thought he really stepped into a role where his consistency was most impressive. He's known for being very fast. He can return sometimes if they need him in a jam. He started getting his hands on a few more interceptions this season, which was something that he'd done a little bit in the past, but he did it a lot more this year. And he was really making his presence felt physically, just wrapping up all kinds of tackles. Next to Jovan Santos Knox, he was right up there at the top of the list. So a guy who made a consistent impact, and a guy who I really think is not even hit his ceiling yet. So he's going to be a great player in this league, and it was fun to watch him play. Yeah,
and one thing that people don't really see, right, and I kind of got a little more taste of it once I was in the building and in the meeting rooms, is what they asked Tunde to do is really out of this world in terms of your Canadian defensive back. They ask him in man coverage situations or in, run down situations to actually come down and play Sam. So I know on the depth chart he's listed as a free safety, right? But he was down in the box playing Sam linebacker as much as possible, covering their best receiver who sometimes shows up at that number 3 spot. And then when they needed him most, he'd be back in the post like a regular free safety. So for anybody outside that doesn't really understand that, when you're in the middle of the defense like that, right? Middle, like linebacker, free safety, Sam linebacker, you need to know everything that's going on, let alone 2 positions that are in the middle of the field like that. And that's what they asked Tunde to do all season long. And for him to have that all-star season doing that, I mean, Corey, you know how special that kind of thing is for him to be moving around positions like that and still playing at the top of his level like there.
Yeah, that does a lot for the people around you too, and you can play Sam because you understand the guy next to you, which would be the mic on one side and the field half on the other, and then the other team rotates into a 23 set, and the Sam becomes a free safety. Free safety becomes, another coverage guy, and you got to understand what the boundary half and the will are doing. So it's really cool to see, and hopefully we'll get to dive a little bit deeper into those, and maybe if we plead and beg with the Ticats audio network, we can get on Ticats TV and break down some film of these guys in the offseason, because I'm sure we'll have some time on our hands. But speaking of all these great players, it's a team game, but there's a lot of amazing individual efforts. And I thought that with the CFL putting out awards and the CFLPA putting out awards, why do they get to have all the fun? Let's put out our own awards, right? So let's do the Tiger Cats Game Day Awards. Okay, how about that? Are you down?
Yeah, the most prestigious of the awards. That's
it. And maybe if they're lucky, we'll send these guys like a text message with some gifts or some emojis. And we don't have the budget for trophies, but
this ad is sponsored, or this segment is sponsored by a couple high fives and hugs. That's really about it. That's all we got to give out to these guys. That's all we got for you. Fist bump, fist bump. But let's start out with this one. Who was your most underrated player of the year? And I mean, I have a guy in mind. I have two guys in mind, but I'd be interested to hear what you think. Who is the most underrated player of the year? Yeah, and there's, when you start thinking about it, we had so many all-stars on the Ticats that it's hard to find an underrated guy that was an all-star. So really what I'm going to do is I am going to go to one of the all-stars, which just this guy really kind of stepped up and had to move positions, a year or two ago, and really ended up going in probably the hardest cover spot on the defense at the boundary corner. So that my most underrated is Jamal Roll, because he had to face, most of the time, that's where their best receiver is. The opponent's best receiver is going to line up at that X receiver right out there where Stephen Dunbar on the Ticats lines up, right? And Jamal Roll had to face that guy. And all year long, he was just consistent, doing his job. Everybody around the league saw that. That's why he became an all-star. But, I mean, he was impressive all year long, consistent as could be. So that's probably my most underrated, because he doesn't get all that shine. But when you don't get shine being a corner, well, then you're doing something pretty good.
Absolutely. You know what's crazy? I had a tie between two guys, and one of them did play corner, but his name was Ciante Evans. And C plays a role where the field corner typically is a quiet spot. You're only going to get a couple of balls thrown your way per game, but you don't notice the field corner until he's not breaking up passes. He didn't really get tried that much during the year because he was just literally breaking up everything. I believe he led the team in pass breakups. And he really just goes about his business, doesn't make a lot of noise about it. The other guy that I thought was highly underrated was Sean Thomas Erlington. And you spoke about how he made the most of the opportunities that he did get, averaging like 7 yards a carry, which is like just astronomical. Definitely he led the league in running backs who had 50 or more carries in that average. So a guy who did a lot with a little, and somebody who, again, like some of the people we spoke about, I don't think that he's hit his ceiling. I think that he still has room to grow, even though he's becoming a veteran in this game and he's been here for some years. Sean Thomas Erlington is a guy that, you love to have guys like that on your team, because they bring a chip on their shoulder, and it's almost better that they're underrated because he's so hungry every single time he touches a rock.
And to add on top of that, he was a huge contributor to that special teams as well. So on top of getting all those, that yard average per carry and, being an impact player on offense, he was actually making a ton of plays on special teams. So, it's hard to find guys like that can kind of, make those big time impact plays on special teams, but then also contribute heavily on their respected side of the ball. And yeah, I like that. I like that big time. And a little bit about that Ciante, with those hashes a little bit closer, right? You would expect that field corner to get a little more action, and him playing top level like that, having the most pass breakups on the team, it's impressive, man. Impressive that the Ticats have two corners like that.
Absolutely, and it was an asset. Who would you give the award for most memorable performance to? Obviously, we're talking in superlatives. These are absolutes. The most, the highest. There was a ton of great efforts. But what was the most memorable performance for you this year?
Yeah, great question. What I come to immediately is Wes Hills when he had almost the 140 rushing. That's probably my most memorable performance because I feel what that was for Wes Hills was kind of his breakout game where, they were bouncing back and forth between Don Jackson, Sean Thomas Erlington, and then all of a sudden, boom, let's hand the ball to Wes, 25 plus times. And he just showed that, he can make these type big time plays. So that's kind of my breakout performance is that Wes Hills, 140 yards because it's like, holy cow, we got a running game going with the Ticats. Wes Hills is the one leading it. And, I remember that mainly.
When Wes Hills had his big game, it was almost like reaching for like that pair of jeans and then going in the pocket and finding $100 bill. You're like, damn, I didn't even know we had this.
Right.
This is amazing. It changed the whole game plan. He was just that thank you, GM. Thank you for bringing on this great player to our team and complimenting what we were doing. Diamond in the rough, so to speak, a guy who waited around for a long time to get his shot. Definitely one of the breakout players of the year with one of the most memorable performances of the year. For me, I thought of one that was important for the team, but it was led by a guy who had a story, and that was when Richard Leonard had 2 interceptions and almost 10 tackles in Calgary when Hamilton won in Calgary for the first time since Danny McManus was the quarterback.
That's crazy.
That was just, it took a heroic effort to spark the team and get them going in that right direction. But he had a pick 6, he had a second interception, and he had a ton of activity in the run game and in the pass game. So the way Richard Leonard stepped up, especially being a guy like myself who left Hamilton and went to Calgary and then came back, it was just kind of poetic the way how it all worked out. And, that defensive backfield, there's already 4 guys that we talked about there. We might as well just talk about Brooks at some point because he's the only person we haven't addressed. But, Leonard definitely needs to get his flowers.
Yeah, and 3 DBs have already won these awards, these highly prestigious awards. But that just goes to show that, listen, if you put 2 DBs together talking about football, well, guess where we're going to lean to? And I'm upset I said Wes's most memorable performance. We should have just made this the DB Awards, huh?
Oh, man, that would be great. Hey, we're not biased or anything like that, though. We just love football. Okay, so here's one more question. And since we already exhausted the DB room, I don't think there's any more guys available for this last award. But who are you most excited to watch play in 2023? Which player are you most looking forward to seeing out there?
Yeah, I'm going to can I give 2 answers here? I'm going to give one player, and then I'm going to give kind of a...
Ooh, curveball?
Yeah, curveball. So the most excited player that the player that I'm looking forward to seeing the most next year is Dylan Wynn. And that's because he finished the season. And if anybody knows Dylan Wynn, that would have ate him alive. And he is one of the hardest working people I know. And from what he was able to do before that injury and the impact that he had on every single game, you make that guy sit out for a couple games and feel like he could have given something to the team to help. His offseason is going to be insane, right? And he's going to come back healthier, stronger than ever. So I'm really looking forward to see, what kind of havoc he wreaks on the CFL. And then my other answer, and Corey, you can dive into this a little bit just so I'm not out here on my island by myself, but I'm most excited to watch what happens under center. Who's taking that snap? That's what I'm most excited to watch. Is it Schultz? Is it Dane? What ends up happening? Is it somebody else that's out there? That's what I'm most excited to watch to see, because I think what the end of the season, especially that Montreal game, showed us is that nothing's really set on whether it's in the coach's mind, whether it's in the quarterback's mind, because I know personally to get pulled at half like that, and I didn't think Dane was having a bad game, that would weigh on me all off season. And Yeah, that's kind of my controversial pick, but I'm curious to see on what you think about that as well.
Well, the last game of the year is the only one that you think about, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's going to weigh on everybody they're going to be thinking about. And about Dylan Wynn, just first and foremost, this is a guy who has become a part of the fabric of this team. He's, in the community about as much as anybody. He's, an impact player. He's not just a player out there. They say there's three types of players, players who make plays, players who watch plays, and players who don't know what the heck is going on. Dylan is a guy who makes an impact. His presence is felt, and quite literally it is felt if you're wearing a 50, 60, or 70 number on the offensive line. So, yeah, to see him come back, he'll be a foundational part of whatever team they're building in 2023. And I know that, his work ethic is going to be contagious with any of the people that are coming back into that locker room. But, yeah, it's always interesting in the CFL because the quarterback position is so critical. They call a quarterback a pivot because the team basically revolves around them, and you need at least two in the CFL.
Yeah.
I think Matt Schilt's performance, coming into the game as a reliever, it's almost like a different skill set. It's CFL is like a hybrid between football that we all know and love and baseball, in that you might see another person come in and throw the rock. And so Matt Schiltz, he's a guy who's done it at a very high level, but who knows? Does he start? I can't say. Did he give himself a great opportunity to have a job next year? Absolutely. He went in there and he did what he was asked to do. It was a change of pace. I thought there was a little bit of a lift in the offense when he stepped in there. But like you said, sometimes it's not that the first quarterback is playing poorly. It's more like Coach O says in those post-game shows. He's like, you just got to do a change up to see if you can get something going if nothing's going in general, right? And sometimes that's the fastest way to do it. But for me, who I'm most excited to see in 23 is Anthony Johnson, receiver. Mm-hmm. A little bit different body type than the standard Hamilton Tiger Cat over the last couple of years. Your Braylon Addisons, your Tim Whites. These are guys who are like sub 6 foot, really fast, really quick. But there hasn't been a ton of receivers who are over that 6 foot. And I mean, he's like, 6'4", big guy, great hands, reliable. He's good at yakking it up. He's tough to tackle. I like what he brings as a changeup, and he's going to be somebody who I think that he demonstrated his worth. And I think he's got a little bit more trust from the coaches because in big games, he showed up and he did his thing. So he'll be somebody I'll be looking to see him have an expanded role and to see what they do to involve him further and earlier in this 23 offense.
Yeah, and it's just so nice to have a guy with that kind of range and that kind of length because you can it's one of those security blankets, right? You see him kind of running across the middle, and even though he's covered, he might not be covered, right? You end up throwing that, out in front of him or, a little bit behind him wherever that DB isn't. And he can just extend those arms, right? It's the old Andy Fantuz style, right? DB can be draped all over him. I remember being in training camp with Andy and sitting there, he'd run an out route, I'd break on it, it'd be right there. I'd be like, ooh, yeah, this is good coverage. Then they'd throw it out in front of him, and I'd reach out, and I wouldn't even get to like his shoulder. He would just grab it, and you're like, yeah, that's why he's as good as he is.
That's it. He'll box out, use his frame, use his reach. And you need guys like that because that's going to improve your second down conversions. That's going to allow you to move the chains, and that eventually will equate to points. And ultimately, Ticats needed a couple more points this year to change their outcome. But let's wrap this up by talking about some of these other bums from across the league. So you got Montreal heading into Toronto for the Eastern Final. Now, Toronto last year lost the East Final to a team we're very familiar with, so they're going to be chomping at the bit. They finished the year 11-7. They had a very formidable defense. They had a guy by the name of McLeod Bethel Thompson who passed for quite a few yards. He was one of the league leaders, actually the league leader, with 4,731 yards in the air. Toronto's a team that we played 4 times the Hamilton Ticats did. But them versus Montreal, they went 2 wins and 1 loss against Montreal, and the last game that they won was on a rouge. So it was about as close as it could possibly get. These are 2 teams that, in the East, we fight it out, man. It's the bottom of the barrel, man. It's dirty, it's gritty, it's close, it's sweaty. But what do you expect to see in this East final game between Montreal and Toronto at 1 p.m.?
Yeah, what I was impressed with Montreal-wise and being a part of the game plan with the Ticats and all that kind of stuff is they actually did a lot of things that weren't really expected or wasn't seen previously during the season, and you do all your breakdown and you don't really expect them to. So what they do is that they switch it up big time for that game against the Ticats. So what I'm looking for is Toronto to look at that game and be like, whoa, okay, they have a bunch of different things that they're doing, so it'll be tough to game plan for, right? Especially when Trevor Harris is playing kind of the way he was, 80% completion, all that kind of stuff. Stand back and Fletcher seemed to be running the ball really well. But the Argos had that rest, right? They had that bye week, that much needed rest at the end of the season. So all that they're, all their horses and everybody that's ready to go, like the Jaguar Davis, if we see Wynn McManus, those kind of guys, they're going to be healed up and ready to go. So, every time I think about Toronto too, I can't help but think Jekyll and Hyde. You know what I mean? Like, they come out, they look fantastic in some games, especially McLeod Bethel-Thompson. Looks awesome in a couple games. Then there's some other games that they have where you're like, where's this guy throwing the ball to? Right? Just throwing up prayers and it just doesn't look great. So it's really like what Toronto you're going to end up seeing. My question, though, for you is there's rumors that Andrew Harris is coming back. Do you play him at this point? Like, Ouellette's playing really, really well, right? They're running the ball behind him. But when a guy's been hurt for that long, ends up coming back, a guy like Andrew Harris especially, does he get in there and get a lot of carries? Or is it, kind of Ouellette's team at this point?
Well, I'd say the benefit of having a guy like Andrew Harris is that he's done it so long that he doesn't need the same type of warm-up as some other players. But another benefit, too, is that the running back position, you could do it by committee. So even if they rotated him in and he got, a little bit, Ouellette could still be an active player in the game. He combined for 866 yards between rushing and receiving. Ouellette did. So he's been getting it done. But Andrew Harris is just a little bit different of a figure. When he does get going, he could be tough to bring down. And I think that's what Toronto's excited about with him coming back. So it'll be something to watch for the fans. How much does he get involved? Does he get involved? But if I'm on the other team, I'm on the defense, you better believe that the second man in is coming for the rock. Because if you haven't been toting that thing for a while, and I mean, it's like riding a bike, of course, you play football your whole life. They're coaching you on the same things, 4 points of pressure, iron cross and traffic, all that kind of stuff. But the other guys get paid too. And if they're sharp and they're in playoff mode, you better believe that they're going to try and come rip, strip, attack, and get that ball back for that Montreal defense, which does a great job of turning the ball over. I think this one comes down to who wins a turnover battle. And if one team takes a lead early, it becomes ball control and just trying to play that clock out.
Let's go predictions. What do you think?
Okay.
I threw this curveball at you too.
I love it. I think Montreal goes into Toronto and I think they win because Trevor Harris is an experienced playoff quarterback, and the Montreal defense, they're on a high right now. I think they got what it takes to beat up that Toronto O-line up front and cause some trouble for McLeod Bethel-Thompson. And if you win up front, then it doesn't matter how great your receivers are, and it doesn't matter how great your running back is. I think that the Montreal D-line causes trouble, and then they finish it in the back end. Trevor Harris goes for 3 touchdowns and passes for over 350 yards in a win in Toronto.
Whoa, that's a big-time game. Big time, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go.
What do you think?
Yeah. I'm going to go actually the opposite of you. I'm going to say Montreal goes into BMO, and I don't think it's very close. I think Toronto ends up winning by 2+ touchdowns. I think, they're rested. I think and I'm going to make the same arguments. I think their D-line is too tough to deal with, right? I think we're going to see playoff Garrett back. I just think that, McLeod Bethel-Thompson's going to be really looking to push to make a name for himself, right? Because he's always been kind of up and down, and this is his one chance going back, especially with that East final that was last year. So we'll see how this shakes out, but I think it's not close, and I think the Argos take it.
I love it. Okay, so let's wrap this up by talking about this Western game. You got the 15-3 Winnipeg Blue Bombers taking on the 12-6 BC Lions, who just beat Calgary. And Nathan Rourke came back and played. He's one of the greatest stories of the recent CFL history. Canadian kid with an arm on him. When he's at full strength, he is something to watch. He can also get out and hurt you with his legs. It's entertaining football. It's entertaining football when Nathan Rourke is in the game, but he's going up against a guy named Zach Collaros, who won 2 Grey Cups in a row. He's at the peak of his game. I think he's in his prime. He's got a guy named Dalton Schoen, who is a Rookie of the Year, and he's been catching more or less everything. So it's going to be, I think this one will be a high scoring game. If I was a betting man, I would probably take the over in the points because these two offenses light up the scoreboard. How do you see this game shaking up?
Yeah. I checked before this because I knew we were going to talk about it. -7 at kickoff in Winnipeg. -7 degrees
Celsius?
Yeah, degrees Celsius. So, what I end up seeing is it's going to be that conversation of the rest versus rust, right? It's because Winnipeg, they end up playing Zach kind of at the end of the season to make sure that he was ready to go and all this stuff. But I mean, they had playoffs locked up what felt like midway through the season. You know what I mean? Like
more or less.
They had it locked up so early that it was, how much do they rest these starters? How much do you play them? And then all of a sudden now it's you get that first place bye, and boom, now you got to get right back into action where it means something, right? I would argue that it would be bad for some teams, but when you look at Winnipeg and what they've done of recent, history, they have the right people there, and it's still kind of that same core group that knows what to do. So, I see with Rourke being, somewhat hurt still, because you can tell that he's not really fully healthy yet. He was slinging the thing out there, but what makes him so dangerous is trying to run around a little bit. I don't think he's fully healthy, so really, when I look at this game, -7 at kickoff, right, which is going to be new for that offense, that BC offense, not new for Winnipeg. Winnipeg's healthy, ready to roll, has the right people in place. Guy like Greg Ellingson coming back too, right? And we all know what Greg Ellingson has done. I think it's not close to this one either. I'm not very fun to listen to because I'm saying that 2 of these games aren't close, but Winnipeg finds ways to win, whether it's special teams, defense, or offense, and I think that's how it goes. I think it's the same old story.
No, I'm on the same page. Winnipeg has allowed the league lowest 370 points this year. The next lowest team was Calgary, but they're eliminated, and nobody else held their opponents under 400 points aggregated on the season. Brady Olive Garden. Brady has been rolling as the season's been going on. No, that's my guy. He's a Canadian talent, and I think he made those Winnipeg fans get over the departure of Andrew Harris pretty easily.
Yeah.
And that's big shoes to fill, man. He's done his thing to the highest level, and the expectations were pretty high. So I think that the weather will play into it. I think the rest will play into it. But you can't count out a guy like Brian Burnham, who just consistently makes the most insane catches. Dominique Grimes, who's been one of the more improved players in the league. James Butler, who has had an explosive start to the season. I think that this one is competitive, but ultimately that massive offensive line for Winnipeg, the experience of their quarterback and the rushing attack that they bring, I think it's a tough offense to stop. And when it's playoff time, that's when the difference is made.
Yeah, and let's not forget about 2 of the biggest game breakers of Willie Jefferson and Jackson Jeffcoat either. Those guys are just so tough to deal with off the edge that a guy like Rourke, who uses his legs a little bit to buy him some time and make those plays downfield, it's tough for him against those guys.
Yeah, so for the last Tiger Cats game day on the Tiger Cats audio network, this is Courtney Stephen along with Mike Daly signing off one last time. We appreciate you spending in your season with us. 2022 was a year to remember and a year to forget all at the same time. But you know what? We'll be back, Hamilton, and we will be doing this thing. As long as you're there to listen, we'll be here to talk that football with you. Catch the games 1 p.m. Eastern for the East semifinal, Montreal at Toronto. 4:30 p.m. Eastern, BC travels to Winnipeg in -7 degrees centigrade to battle for that Western Division title. After that, you can catch the Grey Cup. I'll be watching it. Make sure you're somewhere watching Canadian football because it's the best thing to watch in Canada. For Ticats Audio Network, my name is Courtney Stephen, and I'm signing off. Peace.
It's game day and you're ready. So are we. Let us know your thoughts. Email us at gameday@ticats.ca. Courtney Stephen and Mike Daly are here every game day with their insights into today's game. Subscribe to the Ticats Audio Network on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.